Bienvenidos. Welcome to another episode of my Stairwell Teatro. When I was performing live, I usually had a guest join me on stage, someone who worked in the social justice advocacy community, and we'd have a conversation. And once we were done with that, we would invite questions and comments from the audience. A woman on the front row raises her hand. I acknowledge her and she says, "I'm wondering why you're so militant about your name being pronounced correctly. When my great-grandparents came to the United States, their names were changed at Ellis Island and Americanized, and they didn't seem to have a problem with it. That was just part of the experience of becoming an American." You could hear a pin drop in the theater. Well, I don't think it's militant to politely tell someone that they have mispronounced your name and to offer them suggestions as to how they might get it correct. And I also would like to point out that this notion that the names of many immigrants were changed at Ellis Island is actually a myth. In the blog that accompanies this episode, I provide ample information explaining why this isn't so. There are also numerous genealogical research sites that comment on this topic. And the myth's based on the belief that agents and staff at Ellis Island didn't speak the languages, so they didn't understand the immigrants and what they were telling them, so they wrote down what they heard, whether it was correct or not. The other notion is that the clerks thought people should have American-sounding names and thus gave immigrants a new name as their welcome gift to the United States. And this story persists because it's handed down through family lore and it's permeated popular culture because we read about it in novels and magazine stories and in movies. In Godfather 2, we see Vito Andolini, a teenage boy, probably no older than 15, traveling alone. Today, we would call him an unaccompanied minor. I hope you'll watch this 3-minute clip of Vito Corleone coming into New York Harbor in The Godfather, and I provide a link in my blog. So we see Vito, along with thousands, arriving at Ellis Island and being processed. When he reaches the counter, the English-speaking inspector asks his name twice, and he doesn't respond. We then see an Italian-speaking inspector ask him, "Il tuo nome," your name. But the boy remains silent, so the inspector looks at a tag attached to his lapel and reads out loud, "Vito Antolini of Corleone." The English-speaking inspector repeats, "Vito Corleone," and writes it down. Throughout Western and Eastern Europe, people traveled to the major port cities, Liverpool, Bremen, Antwerp, Palermo, Dublin. Why were they leaving? For the same reasons people immigrate today: famine, extreme poverty, violence, persecution, and seeking opportunities for a better life for themselves and their families. Now, the steamship companies that transported these immigrants asked a series of questions before they allowed immigrants to board. They were required to record certain information in what is called the ship manifest. And that information included the traveler's name, their country of origin, what city or region they were coming from, the port they were going to, and if they knew where in the United States they were headed. In addition to that information, the clerks for the shipping company asked a series of questions to determine if the immigrants were in good enough health to make the trip, which was difficult and lasted for several weeks, and if they were strong, if they were men, to do the manual labor that was calling them in the United States. Because If an immigrant was denied entry at Ellis Island, and the vast majority were allowed to remain, but those that were rejected had to be returned by the shipping company back to the port they had come from at the shipping company's expense. Now, often the immigrants just provided their name. They didn't have any documentation to confirm what their name was. In fact, a good number of people didn't even know how to read and write. So we see these scenes in movies of ships pulling into New York Harbor, the Statue of Liberty in the background, and they're processed in Ellis Island by the thousands. On average, each inspector processed 400 to 500 people per day. That's about a minute per person. So they didn't have time to make up new names or to write names down. They were simply checking off the list of information provided on the manifest. In the scene from The Godfather, we see a nurse explaining to Vito that he's going to be held there for 3 months, quarantined because of smallpox, and she gives him this explanation in Italian. There were plenty of languages spoken by the people who worked on Ellis Island. In fact, a third of them were themselves immigrants. The son of immigrants from Italy, his mother Jewish from Austro-Hungarian states. Fiorello spoke Italian, German, Yiddish, Croatian, and of course, English. So how did these names get changed? Well, it's known that some immigrants changed their names before they left their home country. And it's also possible that when they gave the names to the shipping company, they were written down incorrectly. But it often happened more organically once they were in the United States. A worker goes to the hiring hall to look for a job, and he gives his name, Saflovsky. And they tell him that's too difficult, and they assign a new name to him. A parent goes to enroll the children in school, and the teacher or the administrator or the secretary tells them, you need to give your children American names. And so people change their names that way. You want an apartment in a particular building, but you know the word on the street. They don't rent to Ukrainians. So you change your name, hoping to look more Americans. If you enjoy watching my stairwell episodes, please share them with your friends. And thank you so much for watching.